When we first started, there wasn't an investor who would answer our calls as soon as we said hardware. And even if we said we're software for hardware, you're like, I don't care. Your hardware, that's a black sheep. I don't want to touch that. It's too risky. As more and more companies enter the market, there's more demand and then creates a need for more suppliers, and then which drives the price down. Spend the time building relationships. It makes the investment process so much smoother and like your gut check. We've had 2 rounds. So the pre-seed round was in 2021. The pre-seed round was probably 100 plus. I had a spreadsheet, I had my own tracker, and I would definitely say it was in the 100 plus. The market is much more educated on the potential. And I think it's a very, very healthy and burgeoning market now.
Okay, so welcome back to Default Global. Today, I'm thrilled to have Michael Corr, CEO of Duro Labs, with us. With over 20 years of experience in the hardware space, Michael has worked on everything from telecom to e-bikes, and even helped companies in Shenzhen, China, get their products off the ground. Now he is leading Duro Labs, which raised 11 million to change their hardware design and manufacturing process. Duro helps bring hardware and software practices together, making hardware product life cycle more efficient, agile, scalable, and globally accessible. Michael, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah.
And before we dive into your fundraising journey, is there anything you would like to add to that introduction?
No, that's a great summary. That's kind of what our premise is we're bringing what has been proven to be best practices in software development and agile workflows and mapping those into how hardware products are designed and manufactured.
Got it. Also, can you maybe tell us a few words about the problem your product solves, and maybe share some key numbers about Duro, like whether it's your funding, team size, clients, or anything else you are comfortable sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main premise that we're solving is more efficient data management for your design and manufacturing content. So your CAD files, your bill of materials, and supply chain. Historically, that content has been stored in separate siloed environments. You have electrical teams, mechanical teams, you have procurement teams, and manufacturing teams. And they've each stored and maintained their own versions of that content. And by definition, when you have disparate copies of what's meant to be the same information, no one has any guarantee that they're working off the latest information. And so the industry for many decades has been plagued by a serious overhead requirements of people to make sure that everyone's working off the right content and that the content is transferred correctly. There isn't any transposition issues as you move it from one system to another. And so while a lot of these legacy products have been, very powerful and capable, they've been very inefficient.
Yeah.
And so really that's the premise of what Duro is doing is we're following like the GitHub model where you store your source code in one centralized location. In this case, source code is your CAD files and bill materials and supply chain. And then anyone from any of these teams can access that content through a common portal and based on their roles and responsibilities of how exactly they interface with that content. And so we remove a lot of that manual overhead of the data management and distribution across the different parties involved with design through manufacturing.
Got it. And we discussed this a bit backstage, that raising funds for hardware-focused companies is still challenging, but we see some positive dynamics here, right? So in one of your interviews, you mentioned that the hardware industry has been stagnant, right, for decades, right?
Yes.
But now we're finally seeing more innovation, more attention from investors, and
Yes.
that's funny because the fact that you're the second founder I've talked to this week, only who raised a seed round, is solid proof of that. So what's driving this acceleration in this industry?
That's a great question. So our own investment journey has been difficult. When we first started, there wasn't an investor who would answer our calls as soon as we said hardware. And even if we said we're software for hardware, you're like, I don't care. Your hardware, that's a black sheep.
Okay.
I don't want to touch that. It's too risky. And so for a while, we actually struggled to raise funds from venture capital. And so we had to bootstrap and a lot of, super angels to kind of, we along the way, kind of check by check. So we finally were able to create some momentum. I think it was a convergence of several vectors. One, that we were showing good traction in the market, with the bootstrap funding and what we were able to put together. But then I think the venture community started to recognize that there actually is something here in hardware. And whether it was, several different catalysts for that. One of them, I think, honestly, was COVID.
Okay.
COVID, obviously, as horrible it was for many people, it really exposed the vulnerabilities of the supply chain industry. And those of us in the hardware sector, we already knew it was a house of cards. It's a very fragile infrastructure, very, very delicate. But things like weather, storms can take out a factory or delay delivery. Things like political climates, like Russia invading Ukraine, infected supply chain, or even things like a boat blocking the Suez Canal backed up supply chain for a long time. And so while a lot of people in the industry already knew this, how fragile it was, it wasn't really until COVID that it exposed to the general population. And, when people were going to their supermarkets and couldn't get their toothpaste and toilet paper, they recognized, oh, there's something wrong with the supply chain. And so that started to really open the eyes of investors and saying, hey, there's a real problem here. Maybe we should put some money behind it. So stuff like that, but also other things like there's just a cultural movement that's been happening over the last 10 years or so. And kind of culminating for various events, things like even 3D printing, becoming more prevalent and accessible. It made hardware prototyping more accessible to the common population. And while traditionally hardware is very expensive to get involved with and very intimidating, lots of people with great ideas just didn't know how to get involved. And software is a much easier entrant into that market if you're technically capable and have some interest. It's much easier to get started in software than it has been in hardware, until things like 3D printing and rapid prototyping made it more economical and accessible to a larger market. And so I think a multitude of events like that really grew the interest of the larger community in hardware and started to really gain the interest of investors, that there's real money to be made here.
Yeah. So venture capitalists like Mark Anderson and Chris Dixon, they've talked about hardware as a next frontier, because of the maturation of technologies like IoT and AI. So have you seen this shift in VC conversations during your fundraising?
Definitely. Again, I think it's multiple layers here. I think a part of it, honestly, just a little bit cynical, is the investor community has put so much money into SaaS and e-commerce and other things. They had to put their money somewhere else. Like that market had been saturated. And so another market that has been underinvested is hardware. And so it's a natural place to put money. But I also think there is a lot of opportunities. And again, there's lots of the cost to build hardware is coming down. As more and more companies enter the market, there's more demand, and then it creates a need for more suppliers, and then which drives the price down. And there's a lot more innovation that's happening now that wasn't possible before. Companies like SpaceX, have really shown hardware companies what's possible when you innovate in the same way you build software. And so that itself has created a market of other providers, whether it's suppliers or even software for hardware companies. They're showing that, hey, software principles like agile workflows, rapid iterations can still work in hardware. There are certain physical limitations on how short those time cycles can be compared to software, but those concepts map very well. And so that really sparked the innovation of the industry, being like, hey, wait a minute, it doesn't need to take 2 years and a huge investment to build a hardware product. Like, we can now get a hardware product to market from back of the envelope, paper drawing to production in a 6-month time frame. And a lot of that is through the innovation and even just rethinking how you build hardware. And, what had traditionally been like a waterfall model, if you move it to an agile model and then compounded with now more available rapid prototyping resources, you really can't hit the 6-month mark. And that itself just opens up more opportunities for people to participate. And I think it just creates this kind of flywheel effect that, hey, there's some interest here. The technology is available here. There's a new culture of engineers that are developing hardware that understand these agile principles much better than my generation or the ones before me. And so again, it's just creating this larger ecosystem of more and more entrants that are coming into the market, more innovation, which itself draws more people, who see the potential of this space.
Yeah, and you've been building Duro since 2017, I guess. Yeah, which
Roughly,
which
yeah.
is before the current hardware boss. Yeah. So how did you decide when it was the right time to raise funds? I mean, basically,
Um,
why now?
yeah. Well, sometimes we have control over that, sometimes we don't. Um,
That's true.
the timing of starting Duro was more just coincided with my personal, situation. I had recently moved from San Francisco to Los Angeles. I had left my previous job, and this is a problem I have been thinking about for a long time. As an electrical engineer, as a manager, I've seen this problem for a good 15 years. And it was just seemed like the opportunity that there was a window of opportunity in my own career to do this. For good or for bad, I think, we were a little ahead of the investor market. And the 2017, the investor community, as I said, wasn't really open investing in companies like Duro at the time. And so we did have to bootstrap for a while. Got a lot of
Okay.
no's, a lot of, I don't like, a lot of the market isn't big enough, responses. And I would initially I would be upset. Eventually, I kind of learned to just shrug it off. I mean, the phone or the laptop that the investor was using to tell me that the market wasn't big enough was built using software that Duro was trying to promote. The car that they drove to work, or the clothes that they're wearing, or
Yeah.
the table that they're sitting at were built using the inefficient software. So to say that the market wasn't big enough, I think was just naive. At this point, it's, let bygones be bygones. But eventually, we got better, certainly at pitching, and certainly we started to show proof of market traction, with customers, really loving Duro, what we were offering early on. And then the combination of investors starting to recognize that, hey, actually, there is something here in this hardware space. Let's look at it again. And so I think the convergence of those three things allowed us to really start raising from venture capital.
And let's dive into the tactical side of fundraising. So, how did you go about selecting the right investor for Duro? Were you specifically looking for investors who understood the hardware space,
Yeah.
or there were some other criteria?
Yeah. I mean, again, with anyone, I think any CEO will relate to this. I mean, it's a little bit of, you get to choose who you invest with, and sometimes you don't. Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of it's a mix. It really depends on where the leverage is or what the opportunities are. What we were looking for is someone who certainly understood the problem, right? And someone, most importantly to me personally, was someone I could relate to, I could talk to. I've had experience with the VCs in the past with other companies I've worked at, and sometimes it was friendly and sometimes it really wasn't. And I didn't want the latter experience. And so what was most important to me was that someone I felt I could work with, right, and communicate with, and really understood what we were trying to do, or at least appreciated it. On paper, we were looking for someone who understood the SaaS market. You look through one lens, and Duro is just another enterprise B2B SaaS product, right? And so we looked for an investor who really understand those metrics and what it took to build a world-class enterprise SaaS company. But we also need someone who could, at some level, really understand the problems we were solving. As I said, there wasn't a large venture community who really yet understood what PLM software was, or really understood what the workflow was and the pains that hardware teams are going through. And so we were looking ideally for a combination of those.
Okay.
And I feel, we struck gold. Our first round investors were, led by Bonfire here in Los Angeles, and then Riot, two world-class, venture firms who really, I think, solved that. Later on, we brought on another investor, Primary, based in New York, who really saw the potential of the supply chain industry.
And was it like was it cold outreach, or leveraging connections, or a mix?
Yeah. So I would definitely say spend the time building relationships.
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
It's really, it makes the investment process so much smoother, and like your gut check, is much better. Like it's dating, right? You can't just go on one date and say, hey, let's get married.
Yeah.
On both sides, right? And
100%.
so, again, part of this was planned, part of it wasn't. But we've spent like probably 2 years in conversations with Bonfire and Riot at various degrees of depth. And, both of them actually even said no a couple times when we first pitched to them. And then I think just the consistency of building that relationship, them getting to know us and seeing our progress, us getting to know them and making sure that, they met our criteria. It just became an obvious yes once we were hitting certain metrics they were looking for, and we felt comfortable working with them and excited to be working with them.
And I've been following the fastest seed rounds of 2024. The record is 45 talks with different investors, but some had up to 150 rejections before closing their seed round. So,
Yeah.
How many meetings did you need to close your seed round?
So we've had 2 rounds. So the pre-seed round was in 2021. And then we had a seed round in most recently. The pre-seed round was probably 100 plus. Yeah,
100 plus.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that. I got, I had a spreadsheet. I had my own tracker, and I would definitely say it was in the 100 plus.
And the last one?
Last round wasn't, probably in the 70 to 80.
70, 80. Okay.
It's you gotta spread that net, and see what you can catch. And, like a little insider baseball, I mean, there's definitely tactics about, practicing on some venture capitalists, right? Practicing your pitch before you really go after the ones you want. And so some of those 70, 80, arguably are, some throwaways, but you definitely have to be meeting that many, or at least outreaching to.
Yeah. You also mentioned in another podcast that early on you had calls with customers who were skeptical of your approach because they were used to old a PML process, right? So did you face similar skepticism from investors during fundraising in terms of a scalability of your idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to the historical way our industry works is you kind of strew together a series of separate products, these 3-letter acronym products, CAD, PDM, PLM, MES, ERP, etc. And if you look at the market cap of each of those individual products, yeah, some of them aren't that interesting to a venture capitalist. But what Duro was doing differently, again, by centralizing the data, we really were able to span the market cap of multiple products into one. And so, more savvy or understanding venture capitalists understood that. And so some VCs would look at the market share of, traditional PLM products alone, still healthy industries, still talking in the billions of dollars, but maybe not, the unicorn status some VCs look at. But when we explain to them that, no, we're kind of taking a more horizontal approach. And if you look at the market cap of PLM and PDM and ERP and some of the other product categories combined, the market, the total addressable market of Duro is so much bigger.
Yeah. So I imagine for a hardware startup, especially one like yours that kind of blending hardware and software, the pitch has to be pretty unique, right? So you touched this a bit, but still, what were the key metrics or KPIs you highlighted to investors to show Duro's traction?
Some of the standard ones, year-over-year growth or ARR was very healthy, and we were on that track, the triple, double. Certainly the net, retention, the customer growth, and honestly, I think just customer testimonials. Customers were just raving about Duro and how much we were saving them time and efficiency and communication. I think ultimately that's what investors want to hear, right? Because numbers, I feel like numbers are temporal. Like you could be having a really good year, you could be having a really bad year. But if you talk to customers and they love your products, I think it kind of transcends that.
Yeah, something. So now that you've raised like a 4 million for a seed round, looking back, is there anything you would have done differently in terms of your fundraising strategy?
Um, sure. I mean, so just to clarify, we raised 4 million in pre-seed and then 7.5 in our last
Oh,
seed, so we're
okay.
11.5 total. Um, done differently. Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly before the pre-seed, I think part of that was just, me being a first-time founder. I had participated as an executive in some fundraising in previous companies, but I had never obviously been the lead. Yeah, I would have done things differently. I think I would have made it a shorter window. I think what kind of the first time we kind of had an open window of fundraising for a long period was just more opportunistic instead of having like discrete, okay, we're fundraising for 3 months from January to
Okay.
March or April. It was kind of just this rolling thing as opportunistically we'd meet, VCs, I would just take a meeting. And so I think that stretched it out. I think it inhibited me to really practice the pitch a bit. In the last round, we just had a very discreet, we had very like concrete, we're opening the fundraising on this date and we hope to be closed by this date. And so it was very condensed and in a good way, the pitch was solid and we got practice and just like anything, the practice makes perfect. And as we get feedback from investors, I had a fantastic team working with me, executives, so that we make updates to the deck as we got feedback or questions, we'd be able to very quickly respond to them, which I think investors appreciated. We did a lot of prep work. And so we had not just the pitch deck, but also supplementary, financials in our data room that were very mature. That really helped expedite the process as well.
And probably my last question. So if you had to give like a one key piece of advice to founders raising money for a hardware focused startup, what would it be?
That's a good question. I would definitely say that there's a lot more opportunities now for companies developing, software for hardware products. Uh, the market is much more educated on the potential. And I think it's a very, very healthy and burgeoning market now. There's more hardware startups happening per year than there ever has been. And I think a lot of it is, as I said, it's opened up the community. So it's not just the traditional electrical, mechanical trained engineers that are starting hardware companies, but now software folks are starting hardware companies because it's more accessible to them than they ever have been. And so the total population of people that can start a hardware company is growing exponentially, which means that the investor community is also got to be growing exponentially to be able to support that. And so I would say, it's a really, really exciting time to be in this space. And you're starting to see things like being called the Industrial Revolution 4.0. There's just more and more investment and awareness of the potential of manufacturing and supply chain. And with AI, being more prevalent now, it's a fantastic platform to use for supply chain analysis and optimization. So I think the opportunities are really there right now. And so if you had any inkling to start, a company in the hardware ecosystem, whether it's an actual hardware product or software for hardware product, I think now is like the perfect time to be starting that company.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Michael. This has been great. We've talked about the challenges and opportunities in hardware fundraising. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.